Imagine a world with no clocks, thermometers, or telescopes. A world where everyone believes the earth stands still as the enormous sun travels around it once each day. This was the world in 1564, the year of Galileo's birth. This was the world in which Galileo conducted scientific experiments by devising his own methods to keep time and measure distance. Though Galileo believed his most important work involved moving objects, his real fame came from observing the heavens. No one had ever seen the surface of the moon, the phases of Venus, sunspots, or the moons of Jupiter, not until Galileo developed his telescope. Through observation, experimentation, mathematics, and a great deal of ingenuity, Galileo made extraordinary scientific discoveries. The question was whether the rest of the world was willing or ready to listen. This is the story, I, Galileo, by Bonnie Christensen. I, Galileo Galilei, am old and can no longer see. But there was a time when I saw all the way to the stars, the moon, the planets, the sun. Their movements showed me a truth so profound it changed how we looked at the entire universe. A truth so unpopular it would get me into a world of trouble. Now I am a prisoner, condemned to stay within these walls until the end of my days. I play the lute and listen for the nightingale's song to tell me night has fallen. Though I'm ending in darkness, I clearly recall the sun-filled hours of my early years. I was the first child, center of my parents' universe. Life revolved around me. The lute tunes played by father's students drifted in. Light filled the room, then faded. As time passed, our family grew. Noise and music echoed through our house in Pisa. Season after season, I watched the shadow of St. Andrew's Chapel creep across the plaza and wondered why the shadow's shape changed a bit each day. Father taught me music and mathematics and showed me how the two are joined, music theory. His revolutionary views challenged musical tradition and angered authorities. A person must be allowed to ask questions, he insisted, and seek answers in search of truth. At 11, I was sent to the monastery at Vallombrosa for a formal education. The pious, scholarly life suited me, and so I decided to become a monk. Father quickly put an end to that idea. Back to Pisa with me. An education in medicine at the university awaited, and a lucrative future as a doctor, or so father thought. Mathematics lured me. Medicine bored me. After a few years and many disagreements, I left the university with no degree at all. But like a clever cat, I landed on my feet. At my family's home, now in Florence, I helped father with his musical experiments. I taught mathematics and gave public lectures, which proved very popular. So popular, in fact, that I was offered a teaching job at the University of Pisa. Yes, the same university I'd left without graduating. I was not so popular in Pisa, however. At the age of 25, I scorned tradition. First, by refusing to wear the cumbersome robes of a professor. Then by disputing one of Aristotle's sacred laws of physics. Aristotle, the famous ancient Greek philosopher, claimed a heavy object would fall faster than a light object. I disagreed. To prove my point, I dropped 2 cannonballs of different weights from the Leaning Tower. Just as I predicted, they fell at the exact same rate of speed. But the public was not convinced, even in the face of scientific proof. I was not invited to continue teaching at the University of Pisa. In the winter of 1592, the University of Padua beckoned with a better position and time for my own experiments. Back in Pisa, I'd observed a hanging lamp in the cathedral swinging back and forth. Each swing, like that of a pendulum, marked a unit of time. The memory of this inspired me to begin a great study of objects in motion, including the pendulum and its possibilities as a timekeeping device. My star rose quickly in Padua and nearby Venice. The Venetian navy sought my advice on the most efficient placement of oars in their ships, and I invented an ingenious compass, a device capable of complex mathematical calculations, immensely useful to the military. Yes, my compass was an extraordinary success, but nothing compared to what was to come. Rumors were circulating through Venice of a new Dutch gadget, a spyglass capable of magnifying distant objects. I seized upon the idea and immediately began designing, calculating, and grinding lenses for a far superior instrument. Within a matter of weeks, I held in my hands the world's first truly scientific telescope. The Doge and senators of Venice eagerly climbed to the top of the bell tower for a chance to look through my telescope. Through it, they saw tiny ships on the horizon, ships that would not be visible to even the sharpest eyes for hours. They were astounded by my new creation. But I was not satisfied with the magnification. I worked all summer to increase the telescope's power. Then, one fall night, I lifted my telescope to the sky and viewed the moon. Astonishing! Not the perfectly smooth moon Aristotle described, but a moon with peaks and valleys not unlike our Earth. And beyond, a seemingly infinite web of stars, and Jupiter. Jupiter aligned with 4 smaller celestial bodies never seen before. For 8 weeks I spent my nights in the cold exploring the universe and making detailed sketches of my luminous, imperfect moon. At the end of that winter, in 1610, I published my findings in the Starry Messenger. The book sold out instantly. All Europe was talking about the moon, Jupiter, and me. Suddenly, I was as acclaimed as Christopher Columbus. So acclaimed, in fact, that the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo II de' Medici, invited me to live in his court in Florence. At last I could dedicate all my time to studying the heavens, to the exploration of strange spots crossing the surface of the sun, and to the changing phases of Venus. Through my telescope I saw the planets, sun, and moon. I also saw the truth. The sun is the center of the universe, with Earth and all the planets moving around it. My truth contradicted the popular belief that the sun, moon, planets, and all the stars circled a motionless Earth. Aristotle had proposed that theory nearly 2,000 years earlier. Ptolemy refined it several hundred years later, and the Catholic Church continued to uphold it. When poor Copernicus proposed a sun-centered universe half a century before my birth, everyone laughed at him. But Copernicus had no way of proving his theory, no telescope. With the telescope, I observed that Jupiter's 4 small celestial bodies, or moons, traveled around Jupiter, not around the Earth, as everyone believed. Later, I recorded the phases of Venus, the number of phases, the existence of a full phase, and the distinct brightness of Venus proved it traveled around the sun, not around the Earth. And if Venus traveled around the sun, so could the other planets, just as Copernicus had thought. I wrote and lectured about Copernicus's sun-centered theory wherever and whenever I could. There were doubts and disbelief, even whispers that this was against the teaching of the Catholic Church. Heresy! Then, in 1616, a church panel ruled that the very idea of a sun-centered universe was heresy. I was ordered to Rome and warned by the Pope's representative to cease advocating the Copernican theory or suffer the consequences. I clearly recalled the consequences for Giordano Bruno, a follower of Copernicus, who had been imprisoned for 7 years and then executed. So for 7 years I remained silent. I studied, wrote, and used my lens-making skills to create the opposite of the telescope, the microscope. Through my microscope, I observed tiny creatures with great amusement. The flea was horrible, but the moth and gnat were quite beautiful. And particularly amazing was the way in which flies could walk upside down on a mirror. Amazing, yes, but compared to the sun, moon, and stars? At last a door opened. My old friend, Maffeo Barberini, became Pope. He called me to Rome and granted me freedom to write about the sun-centered theory. But, he warned, only as an idea, not as truth. Nothing could have made me happier. With renewed hope and enthusiasm, I once again focused my attention on the heavens. For 6 years, I labeled on the dialogue on the 2 chief world systems. I was often sick, and no longer young. How I longed for my book to be finished, printed, and read, and for its arguments on a sun versus earth-centered universe to be discussed. But just as the book was ready for printing, bubonic plague struck Florence, and the city came to a standstill. 2 years later, my book was finally published. It sold out immediately in Florence, where it was met with delight and amazement. But what of the copies sent to Rome? No word. I waited and worried. Would the Pope be pleased? 6 long months passed. Then I received the terrible news. A group of my enemies had convinced the Pope I'd represented him as a fool in the dialogue. Nothing could have been farther from my intent. Nevertheless, the Pope was outraged. Distribution of my book was halted immediately. The skies grew dark and closed in around me. A month later, I was summoned to Rome to stand trial before the Church's Inquisition. My crime? Heresy and following Copernicus. My sentence? Imprisonment for the rest of my days, within the walls of my house. All my writings were banned. The final blow came when the Inquisition posted copies of my sentence on walls throughout the cities of Europe. The humiliation was overwhelming. So here we are, the truth and a blind old man locked away in the hills of Varsetri. The old man is a prisoner, but the truth has a way of escaping into the light. Though Galileo was imprisoned at the end of his life, his ideas had taken root. In time, other scientists, inspired by Galileo, proved he was right about the solar system, expanded his theories on moving objects, and improved his inventions. Galileo's contributions were so vast that Albert Einstein called him the father of modern science. In 1992, almost 4 centuries after Galileo's trial, the Catholic Church officially admitted it had been wrong in condemning Galileo, and that he had been right in declaring the sun the center of our solar system.